Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another MindfulBit podcast. I'm your host, Corey Kelly, founder and creator of MindfulBit, your one-stop shop for mindfulness techniques and tricks to enhance and improve your lives. Happy to have you here. I woke up this morning feeling so rested, so inspired. I spent the last 30 minutes talking my husband's ear off over a cup of coffee, and I thought, that's a great morning for a podcast. It's a great morning to record a podcast. So I have some topic ideas in mind for this episode of the Mindful Bit podcast, and the one that jumps out at me that I've struggled with so much in the past, and I'm sure some of you have struggled with as well, is negative emotions. Coming to terms with our own negative emotions. Deciding why we're labeling certain emotions negative. And really exploring the way our body and mind reacts to emotions that we perceive as negative. So that's kind of where I want to take this conversation, this coffee-infused conversation, as it seems to be. And I hope that you will enjoy it. So if you've ever struggled with a negative emotion of any type, I think you'll really enjoy this particular podcast because we're going to be really exploring what that means. And I'll kind of tell my personal story. It's not until recently that I came to terms with my negative emotions. And the funny thing is the emotions I was labeling as negative actually aren't negative at all. They're natural, they're normal, they're part of the human experience. For instance, fear, right? And a lot of these are going to be in the context of my current relationship, right? Javier and I met about 1.5 years ago, and our journey through creating this shared relationship and collaborative space together has been scary at times. It's been new territory. There's been a lot of unlearning that I had to do in the process. And sometimes fear would creep up, and I would feel so guilty about having fear. What does it mean that I'm scared about this? What does it say about our relationship that this makes me nervous? What does it say about my own emotional stability that I'm scared, that I'm struggling with this? And that's the narrative of someone who's not quite comfortable with their quote unquote negative emotions. Because when you zoom out, you realize fear is a normal part of life, especially when that fear is wrapped around a situation or circumstance that you've never experienced. If it's brand new, it's uncertain. Yes, you're going to feel a little nervous about it. Yes, you're going to have feelings about it. And to think that you're just never supposed to feel fear is kind of absurd. But I always had this image of myself, Corey, you always have to show the good emotions. You always have to show up as your best possible self. You always need to strive for perfection and full control over your emotional expression, your emotional self-expression. And that has caused me a lot of pain over the years, kind of feeling guilty every time I would express a negative emotion. And here's what would happen. I would get into this cycle where the negative emotion, fear, doubt, frustration, anger, these are all the ones that I labeled negative. I would begin to feel that negative emotion, and then guilt would lay on top of that, and then it would become this cycle. So not only am I feeling the negative emotion, I'm also feeling guilt for feeling the negative emotion. And the negative emotion never gets fully expressed. So I'm not able to move past it, or I wasn't able to move past it. And I distinctly remember having this conversation with my coach about these negative emotions. And I always put it in quotes because calling them negative emotions implies that they're bad. And from my experience, they're not bad. They're part of who you are. They're normal. The fact that you're having them should normalize them, and you should allow yourself the space and time to move through them. I'll tell you another thing that really stopped me from leaning into these negative emotions, and is that I just was operating from a unsafe space. And this is a lot to take in, but over the course of my life, at some point, I decided that the world was not safe, that people were not to be trusted, that the space that I inhabited was unsafe. My vulnerable, authentic self wasn't safe showing up with other people. And because of that outlook on life, I became very protective over the negative emotions in my life and the expression of those negative emotions. If you're operating from a place of, oh, I'm not safe, then everything you do impacts those around you. And you want to make sure you're always presenting your best self to everyone around you. Because if you can present your best self, you have a higher probability of not angering someone, therefore keeping the space, safe for the time being. But you know deep in your heart that it's truly an unsafe space, and you have to work to make it a safe space. You have to put in effort. You have to monitor your emotions. You have to display this perfectly curated version of yourself to keep the space safe. And you cannot be authentic in that type of environment. You cannot present an authentic version of yourself in an unsafe space. And this is something that I've learned, and I didn't quite understand it until I started noticing myself in safe spaces, and how that really changed my perception of authenticity. When I slowly began operating from the mindset of I'm in a safe space, it allowed me to springboard self-expression that in the past I would have steered away from, because the desire to keep the space safe was always top of my mind. So think about your thoughts on a space. When you walk into a new room, when you meet new people, when you talk with people on the phone, your workspace, are you operating from a place that this is safe? I'm allowed to express all parts of myself? Or are you operating from the default of this is an unsafe space? I need to pick and choose which parts of myself are allowed to show up in this space and act accordingly. Those are two very different experiences. And I can tell you one of those experiences comes with a sense of calm and peace, and one comes with a sense of stress and anxiety. And it's up to you to choose which one is which. Because for me, nothing really changed about the world I exist in. Nothing really changed to make me flip from a default of unsafe to safe. But I just started having enough experiences with people who were safe that it gave me confidence that, oh, I can operate from this basis of safety. My relationship with Javier became a really safe space. It became a place where I could cry and get angry and express frustration. And one of his main values is loyalty. And so that's been so nice, because he shows loyalty and he sticks around and he's there to comfort me during these moments where I'm showing these really negative sides of my emotions, and we just process them together, and it's fine. I also recently began going to a church here in Austin called Restore, And this church is just the epitome of a safe space. They accept everyone as they are and really allow you to exist as your authentic self and feel loved. And you're not having to hustle. You're not having to show a version of yourself that you think the church will approve of. You can really just be you. And that's been another safe space, intentionally safe space that I have existed in. And then my journey through coaching, the space that I create with my personal coach is a safe space full of optimism and desire for change. And I feel that I can express these parts of myself that in the past made me nervous, and they'll be received with open arms. And then my coaching journey through my own certification. Like the whole Animos is the company that I'm using to get certified through. That whole business feels intentionally safe and therefore allows a broader sense of human expression. And so all these things kind of came together and culminated in me and in my heart and kind of shifted my basis and my base view of the world. And it didn't happen overnight. And I did not even honestly realize it was happening until I've kind of been thoughtful about it. Yeah, it was the crescendo that finally it switched from, you exist in an unsafe world, you operate from an unsafe mindset, to operating from a safe mindset. And that has really changed everything. And so it's interesting that this conversation kind of started with, how do we come to terms with the negative parts of ourselves, the emotions that aren't necessarily smiled at or welcomed with open arms. And our conversation today has shifted into, the space that you're in becomes really important. And another word pops into my mind right now, and that's trust. Trust. And that's a big one because you have to trust yourself first. You have to trust that you'll be able to express these emotions without falling apart or dying or causing severe trauma for someone. You have to trust that you'll get to the other side of that emotion and be fine. You have to trust that it will pass, because if you're worried about slipping into it and being stuck there forever, you're going to be very hesitant. It's going to get stuck. That emotion will be stuck inside of your body, and it won't be allowed to flow through. But if you go into it and this will pass, this is an experience. Let me welcome this emotion in. Let me allow it to flow through its natural course. And I trust that I will come out on the other end better for it and with a broader understanding of who I am. Curiosity. Welcome these emotions with curiosity instead of fear. Oh, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. That's interesting. I'm curious about why I'm feeling this way. What has happened that has caused me to feel frustration? Is it important? Is it something I need to bring up? Is it something I need to change? Or is it just because I didn't get enough sleep, or I haven't had enough water, or I missed my afternoon walk? It might be a big deal. It might not. But you've got to let it come and go, because if you resist it and you're not trusting that it will flow through and it will pass, then it will get stuck. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Especially if you're like me, and then the guilt layers on top of that. It's and the guilt of, oh goodness, I'm feeling this way again. I'm feeling this way again. I thought I was over this. I thought I was better than this. That's such a toxic mindset. We're so hard on ourselves, y'all. We can be so intense with ourselves. And yet we have empathy and compassion for others. But when it comes to us, we won't even allow ourselves to feel certain emotions without judging ourselves for having them. Imagine what life might be like if you were curious instead of judgmental towards those negative sides of you. Imagine what life would be like if you were able to freely express those moments of sadness or frustration and know that you were safe in doing so, and know that you weren't being judged for being a human. Imagine what life would feel like if you could express the full spectrum of your experience. So trust is important when it comes to negative emotions. You have to trust yourself first and foremost, that you'll be able to make it through. And you have to trust other people, that they'll be able to handle it. A lot of times we hold back what we're feeling because we have a fear that those around us will not be able to process it appropriately, or they'll judge us, or it'll add too much to their plate. But you have to trust that those people that you've invited into your inner circle can handle your self-expression, and you should be unapologetic about that. And that is very important. That's what creates a safe space. You know, one of the main tenets of coaching is that we are all whole. We are not broken. We're not to be fixed. We're all capable, and we have the tools necessary to change our lives and to get us from point A to point B. And that one mindset, to really embody that mindset, will open your eyes and change the way you express yourself. Because if you're no longer worried that people can handle those negative parts of you, you're allowed to freely express them. It's not your job to make those around you comfortable. It's not. It's their responsibility to set the boundaries they need to set in order to feel comfortable. You have to trust that they'll do that with you. You know, and that conversation might look like, hey, Corey, you know, every time we talk, it seems like you're expressing negative emotion, and I'm finding that really hard for me to deal with right now. Is there any way we can go get ice cream or do something fun and just not really talk about that for a little while? That's an adult conversation. That's adult to adult. But oftentimes communication doesn't look like that. The reality is that a lot of times communication doesn't look like that. The other person would just stop calling because they don't want to deal with the negativity. They would slowly fade out of your life. And we all have experienced this. But you can't let that fear stop you, because the ones that are truly meant to be a part of your journey and your experience, they will stay. And they're capable of handling your emotions and speaking up for themselves. I mean, setting boundaries can be a whole new podcast, because that is just probably a few podcasts, because that is a skill that isn't really taught. It's not really modeled well in our society. You don't see a lot of people setting healthy boundaries with one another and expressing themselves in positive ways. Like, we associate boundaries with something negative. Oh, you have to set a boundary with me. But you can be loving and set boundaries at the same time. These two things can coexist. You can take care of yourself and take care of others just by having an open, honest conversation. That's the key. That's the bridge, the conversation. So, all that being said, trusting yourself that you'll make it through the emotion, that you can express it, and you'll be fine. And the first time you do this, you really are just going to have to trust, because you don't have any evidence. It's going to feel very scary. And one thing my coach told me is be patient with yourself. Be very patient with yourself. In my instance, she said, Corey, you've been expressing yourself a certain way for 33 years. It's not going to change overnight. And as you begin to shift your mindset, it's going to feel very uncertain and scary and very intense. You got to be patient with yourself as you begin to express yourself in this way. The very first time you cry in front of someone you've never cried in front of, it's going to feel like you're dying 1,000 small deaths inside. It really will, because there's narratives in your mind that say, I've never acted this way. It's not safe for me to be seen in this light. And the first time you do it, it will be very scary. But after that, when you see that you survived, nothing bad happened, you felt better, the person you were with actually comforted you, you were vulnerable, so it brought you closer together. All of these benefits from stepping into that fear and uncertainty, that'll allow you to move past it and start to develop evidence. So now you've seen, oh wow, actually I can express myself in this way. That's interesting. I thought for the longest time that it wasn't safe to do this, but I've done it and I'm alive and I feel better. So the next time you want to express something new, you've got evidence that you survived it, you were fine. And this model of trying new things, developing and gaining evidence about reality, can be applied to anything you're struggling with in your life. Any area you want to go from point A to point B, you can use this technique of being insightful enough and aware enough to realize that the first time you shift gears, the first time you take a new choice, the first time you move in a different direction, it's going to feel like death on the inside. And to be aware of that and realize it's not death. It's just something new. It's something that's changing. And I don't have evidence yet. I don't know how it's going to go. And honestly, it might go bad. But then at that point, you'll have evidence. You'll learn, you'll know. Because it might go well. It also might go well. And when it does, wow, you've just changed a limiting belief in your life. You've changed an assumption you've had because you were brave enough to try something new and express a side of yourself that maybe for the longest time you've been scared to express. It's very powerful. It's very powerful. This model of trying new things, this model of being aware when something feels scary and realizing that could be a point for you to pivot and take drastic change in your life. If only you're brave and courageous enough to step into that space of uncertainty and to have a play with reality. I mean, that's what you're doing. You exist in reality. There is infinite possibilities in the world that you exist in. Your current mental model is just one of those possibilities. And at some point in our lives, we start to think that mental model of reality is in perfect alignment with the reality we actually exist in. And as you begin to unlearn that fact, you begin to experiment with life. You begin to take chances. You begin to realize there's 1,000 different ways I could respond to this feeling. I'm not threatened anymore because I trust that I can handle this. This person hurt my feelings. I'm curious. Why did they hurt? Why are my feelings hurt? What can I do to explore this further? What can I do to communicate this with the person? How can I react? Is my normal way of reacting getting me the results that I so long for in my life? If you can grasp just a small fragment of what I'm saying right now, you will have the tools to change your life for the better. And I am walking evidence of this. Every day you come to a crossroad of responding the same way you always have, or being courageous and trying something new, with the understanding that that courageous path is going to feel scary. You're not going to know how it's going to turn out. You're a little explorer. You're an explorer of your life. You know, a lot of people want to be doing something important with their lives. Well, every day you're given an opportunity. This is why, you know, in episode 2, I talk about optimism. I'm optimistic because there's so many ways that you can respond. There's so many different ways that you can react. And all you have to do is find the courage to step into them. So let's tie this back again to expressing negative emotions, expressing those parts of ourselves that we're not proud of, the ones that maybe embarrass us, the ones that we think are less than, the ones that we see in others and silently judge. Ooh, that's a good one. And once you begin to be more compassionate with yourself, you will create space to be more compassionate with others to express their negative emotions as well. I remember I used to feel really uncomfortable around people who would cry or show a lot of high energy negativity. That used to make me very uncomfortable. And I would be judgmental about it. Oh, you know, why is this person not able to handle this or express this? And once I loosened that grip over my own life and gave myself permission to feel and express, only then was I able to create that space for others in my life. And so now I'm at this really nice point where expressing negative emotions feels safe. There's a curiosity around it when it happens. There's trust that I will move through it and I will learn from it. There's the insight that this is just new. It's not going to kill me. And all of that comes together to create this really empowered version of myself that can exist and move from scenario to scenario easily, fluidly, calmly. It's quite beautiful, actually. So I hope you've gotten something from this podcast today. I'd like to ask you the question, what do you know now that you didn't know when you started listening to this podcast? What do you know now that you didn't know when you began listening to this podcast? And how can you apply it to move from point A to point B? Point A being where you're at, point B being where you want to go, what you want to achieve, accomplishing your wildest dreams. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. In the vastness of space and time, it is a miracle that we are able to connect here together, if only for a moment. Once again, I'm your host, Corey Kelly. This has been the Mindful Bit podcast. I adore you all, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next one. Bye-bye.